Welcome to the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Anita Brooks, and here you'll find teaching topics, interviews, conversations, and coaching tips, all designed to help you level up. We all lead someone. The question is, are we leading well, exceptionally well? So join me on a quest, not for perfection, but absolutely for exceptional leadership. Hey, exceptional leader, welcome back. Well, this month, our theme is money makers and money savers in P4 Power Coaching. So I want to talk about many of the common drains that I run across in my coaching business. One of the interesting things to me is how seldom and inconsistently businesses review their financial statements to look and evaluate whether or not the decisions they're making still make sense. You know, sometimes we make a financial decision 5 years ago and we just keep doing it over and over again, but we don't consider whether conditions have changed, whether maybe there's a different vendor that we could look at, or maybe the situation in our business is different in such a way that that decision doesn't make sense for us anymore, or maybe there's a better alternative. So with that said, I first want to just talk about the financials that you should be reviewing. Honestly, I like to see my business clients look at their financials once a month. And if you're in leadership, you should be driving this. So if you are a middle manager, you need to be looking at financial reports for your department and your team. You know, the areas that you directly impact. If you are a leader at a higher level, if you're at a CEO or a board level, you need to be looking at these financials for the overall business condition. But whatever is in your area of responsibility, you need to be doing this on a consistent basis. Now, at the very least, I recommend quarterly, but I will tell you, ideally, I recommend my clients that they look at financials monthly. It's very interesting what you can pick up when you are looking at historical data month to month to month. And then look at that annually. Look at the bigger picture on an annual basis. But you should be looking at the income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow statements to identify where you might be able to save money. There might be places you can reduce costs and maybe, cut back on some inventory. Inventory is often an invisible drain that a lot of people don't consider. I have one coaching client right now, and so they have to buy some raw materials to produce their end product. And there was a glitch in their system that they did not recognize. They didn't really know that this was happening. And what ended up taking place, they were purchasing these raw materials based on reports that were driven by this misinformed data, I'll say. And they ended up with a massive amount of over inventory. Well, what does that do to a business? It ties up your cash. You can't spend that cash somewhere else, and you can't regain or recoup the cash until you're able to sell your end product. But there's limitations on how much you can produce in a day's time, a week's time, or a month's time. So depending on how much that is, and believe me, this was a substantial amount of money, that's tying up that cash for a longer period of time. So inventory can be one of those invisible drain areas for folks. And it's not just for production. I mean, there's all kinds of different inventories depending on what type of business you're in. And so you really need to take a look at that. Sometimes it's even like office supply inventory. I had one smaller business, and they had a massive accumulation of copy paper inventory. What had happened was 3 different employees, and so there was a broken process involved. 3 different employees had ordered a few boxes of copy paper within days of each other, but because the process was broken, Neither knew that the other one had done it until after the fact, and they had stacks and reams of paper that was going to take them, frankly, years to use. Well, you know what? That money was already spent. They can't recoup the money. So that's cash flow that they can't use for reinvesting. That's cash flow that they can't use for maybe creating something new, or that's cash flow that they can't use to, pour into their people, maybe to do something to boost morale. So inventory is always one of those things that you need to look at. Any excessive inventory or storage costs can be a big drain on a company, but a lot of times we overlook it, we ignore it, we blow it off. We don't think it's that big of a deal. But when you look at the hard numbers, you might be surprised at what excessive inventory and storage costs are costing your business. And another thing is, looking at like renegotiating contracts. I was talking about this just a couple minutes ago in the opener. There may be another vendor, but sometimes you don't always have to go to another vendor. Sometimes you can keep the one that you have a really great relationship with. But if you don't ask about renegotiation, then nothing's going to change. But oftentimes it's surprising just by making that request, that query, that they will go, we haven't looked at your contract for a while. Let's take a look at it. Let's see if there's not room for us to renegotiate or maybe make some changes. And sometimes you can save a substantial amount of money, especially if you do that over a multiplicity of vendors. And then optimizing your processes. So often I find that when I go into a business, and I'll tell you, when I run into this, most of the time people identify this issue that I'm going to raise in just a moment as a people problem. And it's not a people problem. It's a process problem. And it's usually the fact that there's either a missing process, so we don't even have a clear process at all. So for instance, the copy paper story that I just told you about a few minutes ago, they now have a very clear process for ordering office supplies that ensures that they don't have a repeat of that action again, where multiple people, unbeknownst to each other, were ordering the same thing. So they created a good, clear process that everyone is aware of. But if it's not a missing process, sometimes it's a broken process. And broken processes are pretty much the same thing as not having one, because what happens, maybe part of the process is working fine, but then you hit the bottleneck where things fall apart. And if you're not able to progress all the way through to the end of the process, it's not really doing you any good. So I always recommend that my clients take a good hard look at their processes. But the third thing is, and I'm really surprised, and I should never be surprised because I've seen it happen enough, but I'm still always surprised when I find this. There actually is an identified process, many times documented. It's supposed to be in place, but no one's following it. We're ignoring the process. It exists, but we act like it doesn't. Well, that's the same thing as not having a process. So making sure that you have clear processes, everyone's aware of it, and that there's nothing broken or missing in it, and we're following through. We're executing that process all the way to the end. But I'm telling you, processes can save and make your business thousands of dollars. Sometimes it depends on the client, depends on what their particular needs are. But sometimes with my clients, I will actually take them through an exercise, first a brainstorming session, just to identify what the different processes are that they have in their organization. And then we go through and we start checking to see if there are any breaches or breaks in those processes, or if people are following them and executing all the way through, or if they're not. It's eye-opening. You would be stunned at how much slips through the cracks just because of those process issues. And then another thing that I do is I will go through a brainstorming process, and we will work together and I'll facilitate this where I help them identify where a process is needed, but they don't have one. And again, you would be shocked at how much money that can generate for a business and for the net profits, that bottom line. So processes, I'm telling you, I cannot urge you enough to pay attention to them. Don't treat your business like it should be operating on autopilot unless you make sure the autopilot works. And so another thing that can help you with your business and help you overcome some of those common money drains is to look for unproductive marketing efforts. Look, I teach marketing. I'm passionate about marketing, but only marketing that works. So making sure that you're not just throwing a bunch of marketing money against the wall and just hoping and praying something sticks. Monitor that. I'm a proponent of making data-driven decisions. Don't just go by the gut feel, but really look at the numbers and the figures. Now, marketing is harder to measure. There's no question about that. But I'll tell you what, how you measure it is you look at historically when certain marketing measures went into place, and then you start looking at your gross income and determine whether or not it's generating more money for your business. If you are doing some things in a marketing way that are not producing results, why keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different to happen? We all know what that's called, right? So make sure that we're not following that kind of insanity model that too many businesses are. If you're going to put money, time, and energy into marketing, make sure that it is productive for you and make sure that you're measuring so that you know whether it is or isn't. Another thing, when you look at your financials and especially look at your profit and loss or your income and expense statements, look to see if there's any unnecessary or excessive spending. One thing I like to do is, and I do this with my own business, is I'll lay like 3 to 5 years worth of income and expense statements side by side. So I'll print the hard copies and lay them side by side where I just really get that visual, and I'll go general ledger line item by line item by line item. And what I'm looking for any kind of drastic or distinctive changes in what was spent for a year. And I have identified a lot of things in my own business very quickly because I do this on a regular basis. I've done it for many clients because I've taught them to do it and they weren't. I mean, I'm talking, there's some clients, we're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars where money just was slipping away from unnecessary or excessive spending that had accumulated in a particular GL, but no one caught it because they weren't really looking. But when you go line item by line item and you do that and track and compare those historical years, a lot of times very interesting things come to light. Sometimes you learn that you're doing some things right that are working very well, and you know that you want to continue doing that and maybe even do more of it. But sometimes you discover that there are expenses that you need to just cut. I mean, they're not gaining you anything. So really look at your spending habits. And the only way you can do that is looking at the data, the hard numbers in your financial statements. Another thing is managing your debt levels. Look, there's very few American businesses that I know that are completely debt-free, unfortunately. The few that are, I applaud you. I know I'm a debt-free company. I have worked very hard to reach and maintain a debt-free status. It is very freeing. But probably for most of you in leadership, the business or organization that you're leading, it's not debt-free. So if you're especially in that high level position, you're an owner or you're a CEO or CFO or board member, make sure that you're managing the debt levels. I'm a bank board member, so we're looking at debt on a regular basis, and we look at debt to income ratios, and we're looking at, payment structures and things of that nature. Do that for yourself. Like, really put yourself into almost a coaching exercise, I'll say, where you pretend for a moment that it isn't your business or the business that you work for, but you are that banker and you're trying to look at the financials objectively and look at the debt in particular objectively. Does the way the debt is structured, does it make sense? Is there anything that could be done to maybe come up with a more attractive interest rate? Now, frankly, we're in a place right now where interest rates have inclined versus declined. But if they start declining again, that might be a good time for you to take a look at that. Now, you need to look at all the expenditures that go into refinancing to make sure that it really would make fiscal sense for you to refinance, but maybe at that time it does. Sometimes it's payment structuring. I have some of my clients that are very seasonally based. Well, for them, it doesn't make a lot of sense for some of them. Now, some of them can handle this, but it doesn't make sense for them to have a monthly payment every month of the year because the majority of their income is only 4 months out of the year. Those other 8 months, and especially, let's say 5 or 6 of those months, times can be tough. So trying to meet that monthly obligation is difficult. There can be creative payment schedules and structures to accommodate that. Don't be afraid to talk to your banker. Look, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? They say, no, the only option is to make the monthly payments. Well, you're no worse off than you were to start with. But if you have that kind of a need, it doesn't hurt to ask. So look at managing your debt levels and doing that in the wisest way possible for your business. Again, if you're in that upper position where it's overall, or even departmentally. Are there some things that are flowing through your department that maybe you could help manage and mitigate that's going to make more fiscal sense for the company? Well, another thing that it can be a money drain for businesses, is unused or underutilized resources. So making sure that what you're investing in, what you're spending money on, you're actually using. I could probably go through a litany of examples of some of my clients who have bought equipment and then they weren't using it, or they were rarely using it. Or they have bought materials because somebody thought we were going to produce this one thing that we never got around to. Sometimes it's people. Like, some of your people have skills and abilities, and no one in leadership has asked questions and delved into what are some of your interests and your passions. That's a really good question to ask some of your employees, because you might identify some skill sets you had no idea that they had that may be very, very beneficial to your organization. That can be an underutilized resource. And so take a look around you and ask yourself, are we making the highest and best use of every resource that we have? Here's another thing. Are you trying to sell unprofitable products or services? Boy, is this one of my big pet peeves as a business coach. I've now had, I don't even know the number, but I've had a fair amount of clients where when I go in, because again, if you follow me much, I bring the heart and soul into business, but I also bring the practical and the tactical. And I'm always about, let's look at the numbers. Let's see what they say, because numbers don't lie. Now, the inputting of the numbers sometimes might be flawed, but the numbers themselves don't lie. And so when you're looking at hard figures and data, and it's come from an accurate place, and it's been input correctly, you should be able to determine whether or not something is profitable or it isn't. So I'll give you an example. Years ago, there was a client, and so they had another big client. I'm talking an internationally known brand that they produced for. And so every time they sold an order, like there would be maybe 10,000 pieces, 20,000 pieces, 50,000 pieces. And these were large orders. And we're talking millions, by the way. So I was invited in because my client was having some major net profitability issues. So they thought they should have had net profits at, this number, but instead it was drastically lower. So of course I come in and I do my thing and I'm evaluating and I'm looking at different sets of numbers and reports and so forth. And it just so happened that this big, international branded client is coming in and they're ready to place a new order. And as the president of the company, who they work directly with their client, their customer, as they were reviewing this order process, because I was looking at everything, they began to show me how excited this guy was about this order. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it was like 35,000 pieces or something like that. So a couple $1,000,000. And as I looked at it, and I just took the calculator on my phone and I just started computing some things to verify what I was thinking I was picking up on was right. And sure enough, it was. So what I did is I broke it down into a per piece, what they were paying. And then I had already done the background work by the time I was looking at this to help determine, and I went through different levels of the company to determine an accurate cost to produce the good. So we're talking labor, we're talking equipment, we're talking materials and supplies, all of the things that go into producing this good. So what were the cost of the goods? Well, get this. They were actually losing money on every piece produced. So what this meant was the higher the number of the order, the more money they lost. And so I showed this to the president of the company and I said, you need to go back to your customer and you need to renegotiate this. And the president kind of resisted. He pushed back and he said, well, we can't do that. They're our biggest customer and we'll lose the order. And I looked at him and I said, I understand. And I do think that you need to use a lot of diplomacy in your approach to this, but does it really make sense for you to continue to lose money every time an order is placed? And by the way, this product was one that was reordered and reordered and reordered. So this had been going on for a long time. What I ended up doing to finally get him to understand the urgency of what I was talking about, I sat down on a piece of paper and I just really scratched it out freehand. And I showed him how over a year's time, with an average number of orders placed for the average number of pieces, there was this amount of loss. Let me tell you, it was an eye-opening figure. Then I multiplied it by 2 years, by 3 years. And I looked at him and I said, so if you do this for 3 more years, can you really stand? Can you sustain this business, this kind of a loss? Can you continue? Do you now understand maybe why your net profits aren't what you thought they should be? Because see, he had a figure in his mind that his brain was telling him that they were making off of every piece. But there was a flaw in his computation. And so it was inaccurate. And he had never really crunched the numbers to determine the accuracy of that. And because of it, they were losing literally millions. And so we changed everything. The good news of the ending of that story is he did go back to his international customer. It was a little hairy for a few minutes, I'm not going to lie. Actually, he invited me to come sit in on it, and I did, and actually was able to help a little bit in that negotiation. And some of it just with a common sense approach. I mean, I'm a common sense gal, but I find most people are at least willing to hear common sense if you speak that to them. And so we were able to negotiate to a fairer price, and where, my client still wasn't making a great deal of money at that stage, but at least there was some profit in what they were producing. And then the next year they were actually able to negotiate up a little bit more. And so now they still produce those products, but they're able to do it at a healthy profit. They're not gouging their customer by any stretch. Their customer is still making a lot of money on what they're producing, but everyone is happy, and that business is able to sustain itself. I'll be honest with you. Again, this was their biggest customer. If they were to have continued in the way that they were going, there would have been jobs lost. I can't say whether or not the whole company would have closed, but I can tell you it would have been possible. Here's the sad thing. They're not the only client of mine that I've ever had that scenario with. I've had other clients who have either been offering services where they were losing money every time that they implemented that service or gave that service to a customer or consumer, or they produced a product and they were losing on everyone. Do your math, leaders. Crunch the numbers. Don't blow that off. Don't rush past it. Don't tell yourself you know what the figures are. Go and assess that. Make sure that the numbers are accurate, because a lot of times when your net profits aren't where you think they should be, it comes from just this type of situation where you really have unprofitable products or services that you believed were highly profitable. Just recently, I had one client. They actually thought they had one particular product that was, I think they believed it was their third or fourth highest profit making product. I took them through this kind of analysis. They were losing money every time that they sold those. And again, they sold quite a few of them. So just do your math. Okay. So besides that, also look at unnecessary employee expenses. Now look, I am a firm believer in investing in people. When I go in and do business coaching, I'm not going in to cut jobs. I'm going in to salvage jobs, but in a way that is going to be the most profitable for that business or organization. But there are some unnecessary employee expenses, especially if profit margins aren't where they need to be. So just evaluate that. And again, go through the general ledger line item by line item and make sure that the money is being spent wisely and effectively. Make sure that where you're spending the money, it's being utilized. Sometimes a common money drain for businesses is lack of automation and technological advancements. I've talked about this in a previous podcast. So my main focus that I'm intentional about is the medical healthcare field, emergency services groups, financial banking industry, and the resort hospitality. Well, it's amazing to me how many in that resort hospitality world still are not using a reservation system. And that lack of having an automated, streamlined system and that technological advance, I tell clients that I work with, you're leaving money on the table. One, we live in a society where so many people, they want to book online and usually from their phone. So if you don't have an online booking option because you're not using a reservation system, that's already causing you to leave money on the table, because many people will go someplace else that does have that option. Or, if you're not having a reservation system, you can't process as many customers as quickly. So that ability, that technology allows you to bring more people through the business. That may not be the kind of business that you're in, but whatever business you're in, don't be afraid of technology. Embrace it. Now, not every new technology is going to be the right one for you or your organization, but do an evaluation and make that decision based on good information, not just what you feel. So many times our decisions are emotionally based when we tell ourselves they're practical, but that's not the case. And so make sure that you are making the truly practical decision and deciding to put things in place that are going to provide greater systems for you, greater efficiency for you, which is going to help your company be more profitable. And it's certainly going to help alleviate that issue where sometimes you're leaving money on the table because you're just not consumer friendly. And then the last thing I want to bring up that is a common money drain for businesses is unmonitored cash flow and expenses and how we're paying money out. Cash flow, you can have a great income. You can have a great gross income. You can have a great net income. You can have a great gross profit, a great net profit. But if your cash flow is wonky, if your cash flow is too tight in the way the money comes in, I've seen businesses fail over this. So really monitor your cash flow. Sometimes there are things that you can do that can change and transform your cash flow and maybe bring cash flow in a little bit sooner, maybe even it out, evenly space it out. What is your cash flow situation though? If you're not monitoring it, you really don't have a clue. You're guessing. And I'm telling you right now, and if you think about this in all of the areas that I've covered today, whether it's inventory or spending or contracts and supplier agreements or marketing efforts, debt levels, underutilized or unused resources, unprofitable products or services, unnecessary employee expenses, or automation and technological advancements, or unmonitored cash flow. All of this, these are things that you as a leader in some capacity, whether again it's in your little tight department or in the bigger picture of the organization, these are things that you need to be looking at in the areas you're responsible for. But do that in a measurable way. Do that in an analytical way so that your gut doesn't get you or your department or your business in trouble. But when you keep your finger accurately on the pulse of the finances of your business, what you will find, and this is my passion through P4 Power Coaching, is it will pump up your income. It will pump up your net profits, and it will pump up your ability to remain a sustainable business for years to come. A business that not only you benefit from, but your employees benefit from, your customers, your vendors benefit from, probably your community, your region, your state, and our nation benefits from. And we need strong, healthy American businesses. And leaders, you have more influence in that than you think. So until next time, I'll remind you again, stay intentional, be exceptional. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. There's magic in meeting with an objective, and I always have an objective for you, not only in these episodes, but also from the other resources I offer on my website, anitabrooks.com. That's ANITABROOKS.com. There you'll find information on digital courses, webinars, books, workbooks, of course, my in-person P4 Power Coaching for businesses and organizations. And if you need a speaker for your conference or your strategic retreat, I'm your gal. But I'm also excited to let you know about a new service that we're offering. For less than half the price of a daily Starbucks latte for a month, you can join our P4 Power Coaching community. This is a monthly membership where you'll get insider tips. And you'll also be able to join our monthly Zoom meetings that are one part strategy sessions, one part mastermind, one part networking, one part coaching. I can promise you, you'll not only learn from me, but you'll learn from others in the group. We'll also have monthly webinars as part of the P4 Power Coaching community, and we'll have coaching resources and exercises. And you'll get first opportunities and special offers for many of the other things that we have to offer. And of course, you will get leadership encouragements. The P4 Power Coaching community is all about growth, success, and celebrating our wins. And remember, it's never too late for a fresh start with fresh faith. So embrace your exceptional leadership impact with fresh resolve to make the difference you were made for.